The diesel exhaust from my neighbor's pickup was still hanging in the October air when I pulled into my driveway. Another 12-hour shift at the power plant. Another day wondering if retirement would ever feel real. But what I saw in my backyard made my blood run cold faster than any electrical fault I'd ever faced. 3 people in bright orange vests were standing on my property, clipboards in hand, pointing at my solar panels like they were some kind of disease. Karen Dennis, our Homeowners Association president, stood front and center with that smile she wore when she was about to ruin someone's week. Her bleached blonde hair caught the late afternoon sun, and her voice carried that particular tone that meant someone was about to get steamrolled. "Mr. Morrison," she called out, waving a thick manila folder. "Perfect timing. We have some federal compliance issues to discuss." I stepped out of my truck, and that's when I caught the metallic glint from my old Army dog tags hanging from the rearview mirror. Funny how a piece of stamped metal can bring back 20 years of military discipline in a heartbeat. I'd need every bit of it. "It's federal issues?" I kept my voice level, but my hand instinctively went to my shirt pocket where I always kept my multimeter. Old habits. "Since when does the Homeowners Association handle federal matters?" Karen's 2 companions stepped forward. One was a thin man in his 30s with a fake federal energy inspector badge that looked like it came from a cereal box. The other was a woman I'd never seen before, holding what appeared to be an official document with too many seals and signatures. "Since your solar installation became a neighborhood hazard," Karen announced, pulling out her phone and snapping photos of my panels, "we've received multiple complaints about electromagnetic interference, property value impacts, and now—" She paused dramatically. "Safety violations." The fake inspector cleared his throat. "Sir, I'm Inspector Williams from the Federal Energy Compliance Division. These panels weren't installed according to the new federal standards that went into effect last month." That's when they handed me the document. At first glance, it looked official enough to fool most people. Federal letterhead, reference numbers, the works. But something felt wrong. The paper quality wasn't right. The font looked off. And the signature at the bottom? I'd seen enough government paperwork in my Army days to know this wasn't how federal agencies signed documents. "You have until Friday to remove them," Karen said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "That's 5 days. After that, it's $500 per day in fines, plus potential federal charges for non-compliance." I looked at the document again, running my thumb over the supposed federal seal. "Mind if I ask who filed the original complaint?" "That's confidential," the fake inspector said quickly. Too quickly. "Of course it is." I folded the document and tucked it into my shirt pocket next to my multimeter. "And you said this became effective last month?" "October 1st, Karen nodded. "We've been trying to reach you, but you work such long hours. We finally decided to handle this in person. $500 a day. That would bankrupt most people in a month. The panels had cost me $15,000 to install, and they were saving me nearly $200 a month on electricity. More importantly, they were supposed to help fund my retirement. I'd done my homework, checked every federal requirement, gotten all the proper permits." "Funny thing is," I said, looking directly at the fake inspector, "I just renewed all my federal certifications 6 months ago. Everything was up to code then." The woman with the document shifted uncomfortably. "Regulations change, sir. Homeland security concerns, you understand." "Homeland security?" I almost laughed. "You're telling me my solar panels are a threat to national security?" "Electromagnetic signatures can interfere with emergency communications," Karen jumped in. "Mrs. Patterson next door says her Wi-Fi hasn't worked properly since you installed those things." I glanced over at Mrs. Patterson's house. Her Wi-Fi router was visible through her kitchen window, sitting right next to a microwave that probably hadn't been updated since the Clinton administration. But pointing that out wouldn't help my situation. The fake inspector was getting nervous, checking his watch and glancing at Karen like he was waiting for permission to leave. "Sir, the documentation is clear. Removal by Friday, or the fines start accumulating." "And who exactly handles these fines?" "The Federal Energy Compliance Division works directly with local homeowners associations for enforcement," Karen said smoothly. "We're essentially federal contractors now." That's when I knew for certain this was a scam. The federal government doesn't contract with HOAs for energy compliance. They barely trust HOAs to handle mailbox colors, let alone federal law enforcement. But I played along. Well, I appreciate you coming out to inform me personally. Very thorough of you. Karen beamed like she'd just won the lottery. We're just looking out for the neighborhood, Jake. You understand? As they walked away, I heard the fake inspector asking Karen in a low voice, "You sure this guy won't cause trouble?" Her response made my jaw clench. Jake Morrison? He's been alone since his wife died. No family, works all the time, keeps to himself. He'll pay the fines rather than make waves. Wrong on all counts, Karen. That night, I sat in my kitchen with a fake federal document spread out on the table, my dog tags in my palm. The metal was warm from my body heat, and I could still make out my old unit number etched in the worn surface. 23 years in military communications had taught me a thing or two about official documentation, and this wasn't it. But Karen had made one critical mistake in her assessment of me. I might be alone now, but I wasn't without resources, and if she wanted to play federal games, I knew exactly who to call. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I hadn't used in 3 years. Mark Valander, Federal Energy Investigation Unit. We'd served together in Korea back when Karen Dennis was probably still in high school, figuring out how to manipulate people. Time to remind Karen that some neighbors bite back. Have you ever had someone so completely underestimate you that it almost felt insulting? Well, stick around, because Karen Dennis was about to learn that the quiet guy next door had a few surprises left in him. The phone rang 3 times before Mark's familiar gravelly voice picked up. "Velander." "Mark, it's Jake Morrison from the 82nd Signal Battalion." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "Well, I'll be damned. Jake Morrison. Haven't heard from you since Sarah's funeral. How you holding up, brother?" The mention of Sarah still hit like a punch to the gut, but I pushed through it. Getting by, "Listen, Mark, I need some professional advice. Someone's trying to scam me with fake federal energy documents." "Fake federal documents?" His tone shifted immediately from friendly to federal agent. "What kind of documents?" I described the supposed compliance notice, the phony inspector, and Karen's whole dog and pony show. Mark listened without interrupting, which told me he was taking notes. "Jake, you still got that document?" "Right here in front of me." "Good, don't let it out of your sight. What you're describing sounds like federal document fraud, which carries serious prison time. Send me photos of every page, and I mean every page. My secure email is still the same." After hanging up, I photographed the fake document from every angle and hit send. Then I sat back and waited. In the Army, we'd learned that patience was often your best weapon. Karen thought she had 5 days to squeeze money out of me. She had no idea the clock was already ticking against her. The next morning brought the first real punch to the gut. I found an official-looking notice taped to my front door. Not from Karen this time, but from the county power company. Due to federal compliance issues, my account was being flagged for review. Until the review was complete, I had been removed from the net metering program that let me sell excess power back to the grid. That was $200 a month down the drain. I called the power company immediately. The customer service rep was polite but firm. "Mr. Morrison, we received notification from your homeowners association that your solar installation is under federal investigation. We're required to suspend net metering until the investigation concludes." "And how long does that usually take?" "Could be weeks, could be months. Depends on the federal agency involved." I hung up and stared at my solar panels through the kitchen window. 24 panels, each one representing a piece of my retirement plan. Karen wasn't just trying to steal money from me. She was trying to steal my future. That afternoon, Mark called back. "Jake, that document is faker than a $3 bill. The agency they claim to represent doesn't even exist. The Federal Energy Compliance Division, made up. The signature belongs to someone who died 5 years ago. This is serious fraud, brother." "What's the next step?" "I need to see this operation in action. Think you can get them to repeat their performance?" "I might be able to arrange something." "Good, but Jake, don't do anything stupid. These people are committing federal crimes, which means they're already desperate. Desperate people make dangerous decisions." After Mark hung up, I walked outside to check my mail. Mrs. Patterson was watering her garden next door, and she gave me the kind of wave that meant she wanted to talk. Margaret Patterson was 78 years old, had lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, and knew everyone's business better than they knew it themselves. "Jake, honey," she called over, I heard about your trouble with those solar panels. What exactly did you hear, Mrs. Patterson? She glanced around like she was sharing state secrets. Karen came by yesterday, asking questions about your electricity usage, whether you'd been acting strange lately, if you had any family who might cause trouble for the neighborhood association. That cold feeling in my chest started spreading. What did you tell her? I told her you were the best neighbor I'd ever had, and that anyone who had a problem with you would have to go through me first. She smiled, but her eyes were worried. Jake, I don't know what Karen's up to, but she's been making a lot of phone calls lately. And that inspection yesterday, I've seen real federal inspectors before. That wasn't one. Mrs. Patterson had been married to a career civil servant for 50 years. If she said the inspector was fake, I believed her. Mrs. Patterson, if anyone comes around asking more questions about me, would you mind giving me a call? Of course, honey, but Jake, maybe you should call your nephew David. Having family around might not be a bad idea right now. I didn't have the heart to tell her that David lived in Seattle and hadn't returned my calls in 6 months. Some battles you fight alone. That evening, I was grilling a burger on my back patio when I heard voices from Karen's backyard. Her fence was only 6 feet high, and sound carried easily between our properties. I recognized Karen's voice immediately, but there were 2 others I didn't recognize. He's asking too many questions, one voice said, male, nervous. What if he actually knows people in the federal government? Relax, Karen replied. I've done my research. Jake Morrison is a nobody. He works at the power plant, keeps to himself, and has no connections. The military thing was 20 years ago. But what if nothing? Karen's voice had that sharp edge it got when she was angry. We've come too far to back down now. The fines start Friday whether he pays or not. And if he doesn't pay, we move to the next phase. Which is? Let me worry about that. You just make sure your Inspector Act is ready for the next show. The voices moved away from the fence, but I'd heard enough. This wasn't just about my solar panels. This was an organized operation, and I was apparently their test case. I went inside and pulled out my laptop. If Karen thought she could research me, it was time to return the favor. Within an hour, I'd learned some interesting things about our Homeowners Association president. Karen Dennis had been elected to the HOA board 3 years ago, right after the previous president resigned following a financial audit. Since then, the association's reserve fund had grown from $30,000 to over $200,000. That kind of growth didn't happen from collecting monthly dues from a 100-house neighborhood. More interesting was a property transaction from 18 months ago. Karen had purchased a vacation home in Florida for $350,000, cash. The home was listed under her maiden name, Karen Schultz. For someone who claimed to be a stay-at-home mom, married to a middle manager at the insurance company, Karen sure had access to a lot of ready cash. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Smart people don't ask questions they don't want answered, drop the federal investigation, or things get complicated. I read the message twice, then screenshotted it and forwarded it to Mark. Threatening a federal investigation was a federal crime all by itself. Karen was digging her hole deeper with every move. But as I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. Karen was too confident, too prepared. She'd researched me, planned her approach, and had backup plans for complications. What I couldn't figure out was why she'd chosen me specifically. My house wasn't the only one in the neighborhood with solar panels. The Hendersons had installed theirs 6 months before mine. The Yamadas had a system twice the size of mine. So why target the widower who worked long hours and kept to himself? The answer came to me as I was drifting off to sleep. I wasn't the target. I was the test case. If Karen could successfully shake down the quiet guy with no family and no connections, she could shake down anyone. Which meant every solar panel owner in our neighborhood was next. But Karen had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd picked the wrong quiet guy to mess with. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made me grateful to be alive. Not today. I was sipping my first cup of coffee when I saw Karen marching across my front yard with what looked like half the neighborhood trailing behind her. The smell of burning leaves mixed with exhaust fumes as more cars pulled up. Karen had called in reinforcements. I opened my front door before she could knock. Morning, Karen. Having a block party? Emergency neighborhood meeting, she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear, about the federal investigation into your illegal solar installation. Behind her stood at least 20 neighbors, most of whom I'd barely spoken to in the 3 years since Sarah died. The Hendersons were there, looking uncomfortable. The Yamadas stood near the back, whispering to each other in Japanese. Mrs. Chen from 2 streets over had her arms crossed and was shaking her head. Illegal? I kept my voice calm, but my hand found those dog tags in my pocket. That's interesting. When did you become a federal attorney, Karen? When the safety of this neighborhood became my responsibility, she shot back. Mr. Morrison, your solar panels are emitting dangerous electromagnetic radiation. We have documented Wi-Fi interference, potential health risks to children, and now federal compliance violations. Tom Henderson stepped forward. He was a decent guy, an accountant with 2 kids. Jake, I don't want any trouble, but Karen showed us some pretty serious documentation, federal stuff. If there's really a safety issue, that's when Karen pulled out her secret weapon, a manila folder thick with what appeared to be medical reports, environmental studies, and official-looking correspondence. She handed copies to several neighbors. Electromagnetic radiation from improperly installed solar panels has been linked to headaches, sleep disorders, and childhood behavioral problems, she read from one of the documents. The Federal Centers for Disease Control issued this warning just last month. Mrs. Chen looked up from her copy. This says children under 12 are at highest risk for developmental delays. I scanned the document Karen had given me. Like the compliance notice, it looked official at first glance. CDC letterhead, reference numbers, even a toll-free number for concerned citizens. But the language was wrong. Government health warnings didn't use phrases like devastating consequences and immediate action required. Karen, I said, mind if I ask where you got these medical reports? Directly from the CDC. I've been monitoring this situation for months. Months? Tom Henderson looked confused. But Jake's panels were only flagged this week. Karen's smile flickered for just a second. I meant, I've been monitoring solar panel safety in general. When the federal compliance issue came up with Mr. Morrison's installation, I realized we had a neighborhood-wide problem. That's when 8-year-old Emma Martinez tugged on her mother's sleeve. Mama, are Mr. Jake's solar panels going to make me sick? The crowd went dead silent. Karen had played her ace card. Nothing motivates a group of homeowners like the suggestion that their children are in danger. Emma, sweetheart, I said, kneeling down to her level. My solar panels are perfectly safe. They're the same kind your school uses on the science building. But the federal man said they were dangerous, Emma replied. I looked up at her mother, Rosa Martinez. She worked as a nurse at the county hospital and had always struck me as sensible. Rosa, in your medical experience, have you seen any patients with illnesses related to residential solar panels? Rosa shook her head slowly. No, but if the CDC is saying there's a risk. The CDC isn't saying anything. I stood up and faced the crowd. These documents are fabricated. The reaction was immediate. Voices rose. People started talking over each other. Karen held up her hand for silence. Mr. Morrison, that's a very serious accusation. Are you claiming that federal health documents are fake? I'm claiming that these specific documents are fake, and I can prove it. I pulled out my phone and dialed the toll-free number printed at the bottom of the CDC warning. The crowd watched as I put it on speaker. Thank you for calling Pizza Palace, your neighborhood favorite for over 20 years. We're currently closed, but if you'd like to place an order... I hung up. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. That's obviously a mistake, Karen said quickly. Phone numbers get reassigned all the time. Karen, I said quietly, you're digging yourself a deeper hole with every lie. That's when Bob Henderson, Tom's older brother, stepped out of the crowd. Bob was a retired sheriff's deputy, and he had that look cops get when they smell something rotten. Jake's right. Something stinks here. Bob pulled out his own phone. Karen, what's the badge number of that federal inspector who came out here? That's confidential law enforcement information. No, it's not. Federal badges are public record. Bob was already typing. Inspector Williams, Federal Energy Compliance Division. Let me just check the federal employee database. Karen's face had gone pale. Bob, I don't think that's necessary. We should focus on resolving the safety issue. Found him, Bob announced. Inspector Daniel Williams, Federal Energy Compliance Division. Except there's a problem. He died in a car accident in 2019. The crowd erupted. People were shouting questions, demanding explanations. Karen was backing toward her car, but the crowd was between her and her escape route. "This is all a misunderstanding," she called out over the noise. "Obviously there are clerical errors in the federal system." Clerical errors? Bob's cop instincts were fully engaged now. "Karen, impersonating a federal officer is a felony. So is fraud. So is threatening people with fake government documents." That's when I saw Karen make the decision that would ultimately destroy her. Instead of backing down, instead of trying to explain, she doubled down. "You're all being manipulated by a man who's clearly having some kind of breakdown since his wife died," she shouted. "Jake Morrison has been acting erratically for months. Mrs. Patterson told me he's been making phone calls at all hours, acting paranoid, asking strange questions about federal inspectors." The crowd turned to look at Mrs. Patterson, who was standing near my mailbox with her mouth hanging open. "I never said any such thing," Mrs. Patterson declared. "Karen Dennis, you are a liar and a fraud." But Karen wasn't done. "Jake Morrison is dangerous. He's been threatening me, sending anonymous messages, trying to intimidate anyone who questions his illegal solar installation. I have the text messages to prove it." She held up her phone, scrolling through what appeared to be threatening messages. "Look at this. Drop the investigation, or you'll regret it." That came from Jake's phone number. I felt the crowd's mood shifting. A few neighbors were looking at me with suspicion now. Karen was good at this. I had to give her that. When cornered, she went on the offensive. "Karen," I said slowly, "I never sent you any threatening messages." "Then how do you explain this?" She held up her phone so the crowd could see. That's when my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed Mark Vellender, but I wasn't ready to play that card yet. I let it go to voicemail. "I explain it," I said. "The same way I explain fake federal documents and dead federal inspectors. You made it up." The crowd was getting restless. People were checking their watches, remembering they had jobs to get to. The initial shock of the fake documents was wearing off, and Karen's accusations about my mental state were starting to take root. That's when Emma Martinez asked the question that changed everything. "Mr. Jake, why would Mrs. Karen lie about your solar panels?" Out of the mouths of babes, 20 adults had been arguing about federal documents and badge numbers and text messages, but an 8-year-old had cut straight to the heart of it. "That's a very good question, Emma," I said. "Karen, why don't you tell us? Why would you create fake federal documents to force me to remove my solar panels?" For the first time since this whole mess started, Karen Dennis was speechless. But her silence was about to become the least of her problems. Because my phone was buzzing again, and this time the caller ID showed a number that would make Karen wish she'd never heard of solar panels. Have you ever watched someone realize they've just stepped in quicksand? Karen Dennis was about to learn that some lies are too big to dig your way out of. The second call was from the power company. I let it ring through to voicemail while staring at Karen, who looked like she was calculating her escape routes. The crowd was still waiting for her answer to Emma's question, but Karen had shifted into damage control mode. "This has gotten completely out of hand," she announced. "Jake, I tried to handle this quietly, but you forced my hand. Everyone needs to know what we're really dealing with here." She pulled out another folder, thicker than the first. "Jake Morrison isn't just violating federal energy codes. He's been stealing electricity from the neighborhood grid." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Several neighbors stepped back, and I heard Tom Henderson mutter something about his electric bill being higher lately. "That's impossible," I said, but Karen was already pulling out what looked like power company records. "These are his actual energy consumption records for the past 6 months, she announced, handing out copies. "Notice anything interesting?" Rosa Martinez looked up from her copy. "It says here that your house used negative electricity 3 times last month. How is that even possible?" "It's called net metering," I explained. "When my panels produce more power than I use, the excess goes back into the grid and I get credit for it. It's completely legal and it's stealing," Karen interrupted. "You're forcing your neighbors to subsidize your electric bill. Every kilowatt you pump back into the system has to be paid for by someone else." That wasn't how net metering worked, but Karen was counting on most people not understanding the electrical grid. And judging by the confused faces around me, her strategy was working. Bob Henderson was studying his copy of the supposed power records. These numbers don't make sense, Karen. According to this, Jake's house consumed negative 200 kilowatt hours in July, but the meter readings show positive consumption. Obviously, the meters have been tampered with, Karen replied smoothly. Jake has 23 years of electrical experience. He knows how to manipulate power systems. I felt the crowd's suspicion growing. Karen was brilliant at this. She'd taken my professional qualifications and turned them into evidence of criminal behavior. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "Emergency, call me now." I showed my phone to Bob Henderson. "Bob, I need to take this call. Can you keep an eye on things here?" Bob nodded, but I could see doubt creeping into his expression. Karen's accusations were doing their job. I stepped into my garage and called Mark back. "Jake, we've got a problem. The woman you're dealing with, Karen Dennis, she's not just running a neighborhood scam. She's connected to a much bigger operation." "What kind of operation?" "We've been tracking a nationwide scheme targeting solar panel owners, fake federal documents, fraudulent inspections, extortion through homeowners associations. The operation is pulling in millions of dollars annually." My blood ran cold. "Mark, she's outside right now, accusing me of stealing electricity from my neighbors." "That's their secondary play. When the federal fraud doesn't work, they switch to utility theft accusations. Jake, this woman is dangerous. She's not some amateur running a small-time scam." "What do you need from me?" "I need you to get her to repeat the federal document fraud on the record. We're about 30 minutes out. Can you keep her engaged until we arrive?" Through my garage window, I could see the crowd had grown. More neighbors were arriving, and Karen was holding court like she was running for mayor. "Mark, I don't think I can keep this together for 30 minutes. She's turning the entire neighborhood against me." "Then don't keep it together. Let it fall apart. Sometimes the best way to catch a fraud is to let them think they've won." When I walked back outside, the situation had deteriorated. Someone had called the police, and Officer Janet Miller was taking notes while Karen provided her version of events. Janet was young, maybe 5 years out of the academy, and she looked overwhelmed by the crowd of angry homeowners. "Officer Miller," I said, approaching slowly. "I'm Jake Morrison. I understand there's been some confusion about my solar installation. Mr. Morrison, I've received multiple complaints about federal document fraud, utility theft, and threatening behavior. I'm going to need to see some identification and ask you a few questions." Karen stepped up beside Officer Miller. "Officer, I have documentation of everything. The fake federal compliance notices, the manipulated power records, the threatening text messages. This man is a danger to the neighborhood." She handed Janet the manila folders, and I watched the young officer's eyes widen as she flipped through the fake documents. To someone without specialized training, Karen's fabrications looked convincing. "Mr. Morrison, can you explain these federal compliance violations?" Officer Miller asked. "Officer, those documents are fabrications. The agency they claim to represent doesn't exist, and the inspector who supposedly signed them died 4 years ago." "That's a very serious accusation, sir. Do you have evidence to support that claim?" Before I could answer, Karen jumped in. "Officer, Mr. Morrison has been making wild conspiracy theories all morning. He claims that federal health documents from the CDC are fake, that licensed federal inspectors are actors, and that official power company records are fabricated. Does that sound like rational behavior to you?" Officer Miller was clearly in over her head. A crowd of 20-plus residents, fake federal documents, utility fraud accusations, and a man claiming it was all an elaborate hoax. I didn't blame her for being skeptical. "Mr. Morrison, I'm going to need you to come down to the station to sort this out." "Am I under arrest?" "Not at this time, but we need to investigate these allegations thoroughly." That's when Mrs. Patterson stepped forward. At 78, she'd seen enough nonsense to last several lifetimes. "Officer Miller, I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years. Jake Morrison is the most honest man I've ever met. If he says those documents are fake, then they're fake." "Mrs. Patterson, I appreciate your input, but—" "No buts. Karen Dennis has been asking strange questions about Jake for weeks, wanting to know about his family, his work schedule, his financial situation. That's not normal behavior for a homeowners association president." Karen's face flushed red. Margaret, I was conducting a routine compliance review. Compliance review my foot. You were casing him like a criminal. The crowd was starting to murmur among themselves. Mrs. Patterson's words carried weight in this neighborhood, but Karen wasn't finished. Officer Miller, I think Mrs. Patterson's age might be affecting her judgment. She's been confused lately about a lot of things. That was Karen's second major mistake of the day. You don't insult Margaret Patterson in front of her neighbors. Karen Dennis, Mrs. Patterson said in a voice that could cut glass. I may be 78 years old, but my mind is sharp as a tack, and what I see is a con artist trying to steal from a good man. Officer Miller was writing frantically, trying to keep up with accusations flying from all directions. That's when my salvation arrived in the form of 2 black SUVs pulling up to the curb. 4 people in suits got out, led by a tall man with gray hair and the kind of posture that screamed, Federal Agent. Mark Valander walked straight to Officer Miller. Agent Mark Valander, Federal Energy Investigation Unit, I believe you're dealing with some fake federal documents? Karen went white as printer paper. Agent Valander, yes sir. We have allegations of document fraud and utility theft. Mark pulled out his credentials. Officer Miller, those documents are part of an ongoing federal investigation into organized fraud. I'm going to need you to secure them as evidence. He turned to face the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been witnessing the operation of a criminal enterprise that's been targeting solar panel owners across 12 states. The fake federal documents, the fraudulent inspections, the utility theft accusations, it's all part of an elaborate extortion scheme. Karen made a break for her car, but one of Mark's agents was already standing beside it. Karen Dennis, you're under arrest for federal document fraud, impersonation of a federal officer, and conspiracy to commit extortion. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Karen looked directly at me. This isn't over, Morrison. You have no idea how deep this goes. But as I watched her being loaded into the federal SUV, I realized that Karen Dennis had just made her third and final mistake. She'd threatened a federal investigation within earshot of 4 federal agents. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting criminals be criminals long enough for the law to catch up. But I was about to learn that catching Karen Dennis was just the beginning. Because as Mark would explain to me later, some criminal enterprises have very long arms and very long memories. The crowd began to disperse after Karen was driven away, but the damage was already spreading through the neighborhood like wildfire. I could see it in the sideways glances, the hushed conversations, the way some neighbors avoided eye contact as they walked back to their houses. Mark approached me as Officer Miller finished securing the fake documents. Jake, we need to talk privately. There's more to this than what just happened here. We went inside my house, and Mark's expression was grim as he sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where Sarah and I had planned our retirement, where we'd discussed installing those solar panels that had started this whole mess. Jake, Karen Dennis isn't the top of this operation. She's middle management. What do you mean? Mark pulled out a tablet and showed me a network diagram that looked like something from a spy movie. Lines connected dozens of names across multiple states, with Karen's name sitting in one of the mid-level boxes. This organization has been operating for 3 years. They target homeowners with valuable assets, solar panels, pools, home additions, anything that might have permit or compliance issues. Then they manufacture a crisis and extort money to make it go away. I studied the diagram. How much money are we talking about? Conservatively, $23 million over 3 years. But here's the thing, Jake. Karen Dennis was specifically assigned to your case. Assigned by who? Mark pointed to a name at the top of the diagram, Richard Kozlov. He's the one calling the shots, and according to our investigation, you weren't chosen randomly. The cold feeling in my chest was back. What aren't you telling me, Mark? 3 months ago, your power company was targeted for acquisition by a consortium of investors. The deal fell through when the buyer discovered that net metering customers like you were cutting into potential profits. Your neighborhood has the highest concentration of solar panels in the county. I felt like I'd been punched. So this was never about compliance violations or safety concerns. It was about eliminating solar panel owners to make the power company more attractive to investors. Karen's job was to create a template, find ways to force solar customers to disconnect from the grid or pay massive fines. Mark's tablet chimed with an incoming message. His face darkened as he read it. "What is it?" "Richard Kozlov just posted your bail for Karen Dennis. She's being released within the hour." I stood up so fast my chair nearly tipped over. She was just arrested for federal crimes. How is she getting bail? "Because Richard Kozlov has connections, money, and a very good lawyer. Jake, this isn't over. It's just beginning." That's when my landline rang. I almost didn't answer it, but the caller ID showed my power company's customer service number. "Mr. Morrison, this is David Chen from the Billing Dispute Department. I'm calling about your account review." Mark gestured for me to put it on speaker. "What about it?" "Well, sir, we've completed our analysis of your power usage for the past 6 months, and we've found some significant discrepancies. It appears your solar system has been feeding power back into the grid without proper metering." "That's impossible. I have net metering. It's all been approved and monitored." "Sir, according to our records, you owe the company $14,357 for unauthorized grid usage." Mark grabbed the phone. "This is Agent Vellender, Federal Energy Investigation Unit. Who authorized this billing review?" There was a long pause. I'm not authorized to discuss that with third parties." "Mr. Chen, this account is part of a federal fraud investigation. Any billing changes made while the investigation is ongoing could be considered obstruction of justice." Another pause. "Agent Vellender, I'll need to transfer you to my supervisor." The line went dead. Mark looked at his tablet again. "Jake, Richard Kozlov owns 17% of your power company." The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed made me sick. So even if Karen goes to prison, the power company can still destroy me financially. That's exactly right. And there's something else. Karen Dennis made 3 phone calls from jail before she was released. 1 to her lawyer, 1 to Richard Kozlov, and 1 to a number we haven't been able to trace. "What kind of number?" "The kind that suggests this organization has resources beyond what we originally thought." My doorbell rang, and through the peephole, I could see a man in an expensive suit holding what looked like legal documents. "Mark, we've got company." Mark peered through the peephole. "Process server. They're moving fast." I opened the door, and the man handed me a thick envelope. "Jake Morrison, you've been served." I ripped open the envelope and read the first page. Then I read it again, because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "They're suing me for property damage, emotional distress, and defamation of character," I told Mark. "Karen Dennis is claiming that my accusations this morning damaged her reputation and caused her emotional trauma. She wants $250,000. Mark shook his head. "Classic intimidation tactic. File a massive lawsuit to discourage the victim from cooperating with law enforcement." That's when my cell phone started ringing. Unknown number. "Answer it," Mark said, "but put it on speaker." Jake Morrison. "Mr. Morrison, this is attorney Patricia Vance. I represent Karen Dennis and several other parties in this matter. I believe we can resolve this situation without further unpleasantness." "What kind of resolution?" "My client is willing to drop all charges and lawsuits in exchange for your signed agreement to disconnect your solar panels and refrain from further contact with federal authorities." Mark was frantically typing on his tablet, trying to trace the call. "And if I refuse?" "Then I'm afraid this matter will become very expensive and very public. We have documentation of your erratic behavior, your threats against Mrs. Dennis, and your attempts to defraud the power company. A civil trial would be unpleasant for someone in your position." The line went dead. Mark looked up from his tablet. "Jake, that call came from a law office in Miami that's been linked to organized crime. You're not dealing with a neighborhood scam anymore. You're dealing with something much bigger and much more dangerous." I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at my solar panels, 24 panels that had represented freedom and independence. Now they were the center of a conspiracy that reached from my backyard to corporate boardrooms to criminal enterprises in multiple states. "Mark, what happens if I just give up? Disconnect the panels, pay whatever they want, and try to disappear?" "They'll do it to the next guy, and the next, and the next. Jake, you're not just fighting for your own house anymore. You're fighting for every homeowner who's ever tried to break free from corporate control." That evening, after Mark and his team left, I sat alone in my living room, holding Sarah's photo. She'd been the one who convinced me to install the solar panels in the first place. "We can't control the power company's rates," she'd said, "but we can control how much power we need to buy from them." Sarah had always been smarter than me. She'd seen this fight coming years before I did. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Some battles aren't worth winning. Think about your future." I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Mark. Then I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and tried to figure out how a simple dispute with my homeowners association had turned into a war against organized crime. But as I sat there in the dark, I realized that Karen Dennis and Richard Kozlov had made one critical error in judgment. They'd threatened my future, but what they didn't understand was that after losing Sarah, my future wasn't something I was particularly afraid of losing. Some men fight because they have something to gain. Others fight because they have nothing left to lose. Tomorrow, they were going to find out which kind of man they were dealing with. Have you ever reached the point where backing down becomes more dangerous than moving forward? Well, that's exactly where I found myself. And sometimes, when you're caught between impossible choices, the only option left is to change the rules of the game entirely. Friday morning brought the kind of silence that makes you check if your phone is working. No threatening calls, no process servers, no fake inspectors. Just the October wind rattling my windows and the distant hum of my solar panels doing what they were designed to do. That silence should have been a warning. I was drinking my second cup of coffee when Mark called. "Jake, we have a problem. Karen Dennis disappeared from her house sometime last night." "Disappeared how?" "Electronic ankle monitor was found cut off in her driveway. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. She left voluntarily." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. Where does that leave me? Exposed. Jake, when people in organized crime disappear, it usually means one of 2 things. Either they're running, or they're being repositioned for something bigger. I walked to my front window and looked out at the neighborhood. Everything appeared normal. Mrs. Patterson was getting her mail. The Yamadas were loading groceries from their car. Tom Henderson was raking leaves in his front yard. "Mark, what would something bigger look like? Property damage, personal injury, maybe even..." The line went dead. I tried calling Mark back, but the call went straight to voicemail. Then I tried his office number. Same thing. Either Mark's phone was broken, or someone was jamming cellular communications in my area. That's when I noticed the white van parked at the end of my street. It had been there when I woke up, and it was still there now. The windows were tinted, but I could make out at least 2 figures in the front seats. I went to my garage and pulled out my old Army field glasses. Through the lenses, I could see that the van had equipment on the roof that definitely wasn't standard automotive hardware. Communications gear, maybe surveillance equipment. My landline rang, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Jake Morrison. "Mr. Morrison, this is Dr. Elizabeth Warren from the State Environmental Protection Agency." The voice was crisp, professional, and completely unfamiliar. "We've received multiple reports about dangerous electromagnetic emissions from your residential solar installation." "Dr. Warren, let me stop you right there. I've been through this already with fake federal inspectors. I'm not falling for the same scam twice." "Mr. Morrison, I understand your skepticism, but I assure you this is legitimate. We have readings showing that your panels are emitting radiation levels 30 times higher than federal safety standards." Despite myself, I felt a chill. "What kind of readings?" "I'd rather not discuss this over the phone. May I come by your house this afternoon to show you the data?" Everything about this felt wrong, but I needed to know how deep this went. "Fine. What time?" "I'll be there at 2 o'clock, and Mr. Morrison. You might want to have your homeowner's insurance information available. Depending on what our investigation reveals, there could be significant liability issues." After she hung up, I called the state EPA office directly. After being transferred 3 times, I finally reached someone who could answer my question. "Dr. Elizabeth Warren," the clerk said. "Sir, we don't have anyone by that name in our environmental compliance division." Of course they didn't. I was starting to understand the scope of what I was facing. This wasn't just Karen Dennis running a neighborhood scam. This was a sophisticated operation with multiple players, fake credentials, and resources that reached into government agencies and corporate boardrooms. At 1:45 p.m., I positioned myself at my front window with my field glasses. The white van was still there, and now there was a second vehicle, a black sedan parked 2 houses down. Dr. Elizabeth Warren arrived precisely at 2 o'clock in a silver Honda with government plates. She was tall, brunette, probably 45 years old, and carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from years of intimidating people with official-sounding nonsense. "Mr. Morrison?" She extended her hand as I opened the door. "Dr. Warren, State EPA, thank you for meeting with me." She was good, I had to give her that. Professional demeanor, proper credentials, even the right kind of briefcase. If I hadn't already been through Karen's song and dance, I might have been fooled. "Dr. Warren, before we begin, would you mind if I photographed your credentials for my records?" "Of course." She handed me her ID badge without hesitation. The badge looked perfect. State EPA logo, official seal, even a barcode and magnetic stripe. But when I looked closely at the photo, I noticed something odd. The lighting didn't match the rest of the badge. "Dr. Warren, how long have you been with the EPA?" 12 years. I specialize in electromagnetic radiation from residential energy systems." "Interesting specialty. How many cases like mine have you investigated?" "Dozens. Unfortunately, the problem is becoming more widespread as solar installations increase." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a tablet. "These are the readings we took from your property yesterday." The screen showed a graph with radiation levels that looked genuinely alarming. Red zones, warning indicators, measurements that were supposedly 30 times higher than safe levels. "You took readings yesterday?" "I didn't see anyone on my property." "We have sensitive equipment that can take measurements from a distance. The readings were taken from the street." I looked at the graph more closely. The timestamps showed readings taken at 3:47 a.m. "Dr. Warren, you were measuring my solar panel emissions at 3:47 in the morning?" She glanced at her tablet. "Our equipment operates around the clock to get accurate baseline measurements." "In the dark, when the panels aren't producing any electricity?" For the first time, she hesitated. "Solar panels can emit residual radiation even when not actively generating power." That's when I knew for certain she was lying. Solar panels don't emit electromagnetic radiation at all. They convert light into electricity. An EPA specialist would know that. "Dr. Warren, what's your educational background?" "PhD in environmental science from Stanford, with a specialty in electromagnetic field analysis." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "And you're telling me that my solar panels, which convert photons into electrons, are somehow emitting dangerous electromagnetic radiation?" "Mr. Morrison, the physics are quite complex, but essentially, a bort maiden mina band dist." "The physics are simple," I interrupted. "Solar panels are passive devices. They don't emit anything. They absorb light and convert it to electricity. Anyone with a PhD in environmental science would know that." Her professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Mr. Morrison, perhaps you'd prefer to discuss this with my supervisor." "Actually, I'd prefer to discuss it with Agent Mark Vellender from the Federal Energy Investigation Unit, but strangely, I can't reach him today. Almost like someone is jamming cellular communications in this area." She closed her briefcase and stood up. "Mr. Morrison, I can see you're not willing to cooperate with this investigation. That's unfortunate. What happens next, Dr. Warren?" "The state EPA will be forced to take emergency action to protect public safety. Your power will be disconnected, and you'll be liable for any health effects on your neighbors." She walked toward the door, then turned back. "Mr. Morrison, some situations can be resolved quietly, and some require public intervention. I'd suggest you consider which option would be less disruptive to your life." After she left, I watched through my window as she got into her car and drove past the white van. She slowed down and appeared to exchange words with someone in the van before driving away. That's when my landline rang again. "Jake, it's Mark. Don't talk long. They're monitoring communications in your area." "Mark, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you all day." "They jammed my cell tower. Jake, listen carefully. Richard Kozloff is escalating. We intercepted communications suggesting they're planning something for tonight." "What kind of something?" "We're not sure, but Jake, you need to get out of there. Pack a bag and go somewhere safe until we can." The line went dead, but this time I heard the click that meant someone had cut the connection. I looked out at my solar panels gleaming in the afternoon sun. 24 panels that had somehow become the center of a war I never wanted to fight. But as I stood there, I realized that running wasn't an option anymore. Not just because they'd probably follow me, but because every solar panel owner in America was watching to see what happened next. If I ran, they'd know that their system worked, that they could intimidate anyone, anywhere, into giving up their independence. That night, I sat in my living room with all the lights off, my old Army dog tags in one hand and my phone in the other, waiting to see what Richard Kozlov's people had planned. But I wasn't waiting passively, because while they'd been busy trying to scare me with fake doctors and surveillance vans, I'd been making some plans of my own. Sometimes the best defense is letting your enemies think they've got you cornered, right up until the moment you spring your own trap. At 11:47 p.m., they made their move. I was sitting in my darkened living room when I heard the soft crunch of gravel in my driveway. Through my front window, I could see 3 figures moving toward my house. They weren't trying to hide anymore. The lead figure was Karen Dennis. I'd been expecting her. What I hadn't expected was seeing her pull out what looked like a small explosive device and attach it to my electrical meter. That's when I activated the plan I'd been working on all evening. "This is Jake Morrison at 1247 Pine Street," I said into my phone, speaking loudly enough to be heard through my open window. "I have 3 individuals on my property attempting to destroy my electrical equipment. I need police assistance immediately." But I wasn't calling 911. I was calling a conference number that Mark had given me, connecting me directly to the FBI field office, the State Attorney General's office, and a live recording system that would capture everything that happened next. Karen heard my voice and looked directly at my house. "Morrison, get out here!" I stepped onto my front porch, keeping my hands visible. "Karen, I have to say, orange really isn't your color." She was wearing what appeared to be a utility worker's uniform, complete with a hard hat and work boots. Her 2 companions were dressed identically, and they were carrying equipment that looked suspiciously like the same gear the fake federal inspector had used. "Jake Morrison, by order of the State Environmental Protection Agency, your solar installation is being disconnected due to imminent public safety hazards. At midnight, on a Friday, without a warrant. Emergency powers don't require warrants." I held up my phone so she could see I was recording. "Karen, would you mind stating your full name and authority for the record?" "I'm Dr. Karen Dennis, Emergency Compliance Officer for the State Environmental Protection Agency." "That's interesting, Karen, because 4 days ago, you were Karen Dennis, President of the Homeowners Association. Yesterday, you were under arrest for federal document fraud. Tonight, you're a state environmental officer. That's quite a career trajectory." One of her companions stepped forward. "Sir, please step aside. This is official state business." "What's your name, officer?" "Inspector Williams, State EPA Enforcement Division." I almost laughed. "Inspector Williams? The same Inspector Williams who died in a car accident in 2019? You guys really need to update your fake identity roster." That's when Karen made her fatal mistake. Instead of retreating, instead of trying to maintain the charade, she let her anger take control. "Enough games, Morrison. You want to play federal investigator? Fine. Let's see how tough you are when your house burns down with you in it." She held up what was clearly an incendiary device. "Karen," I said quietly, "you just threatened to murder me on a live recording that's being monitored by federal law enforcement." Her face went white as she realized what she'd just said. "That's right," I continued. "This entire conversation is being recorded and broadcast in real time to the FBI, the State Attorney General's office, and the Federal Energy Investigation Unit. Wave hello to Agent Mark Vellender, who's probably about 2 minutes away with backup." The sound of sirens in the distance confirmed my timing. Karen's companions immediately started backing toward their van, but Karen herself seemed frozen in place. "You think you're so smart," she said. "You have no idea what you're up against. Richard Kozlov owns judges, prosecutors, entire police departments. This recording won't matter." "Maybe not," I admitted, "but here's what will matter." I pulled out my old Army dog tags and held them up so she could see them. 23 years ago, I took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath doesn't expire when you retire. The sirens were getting louder. "Karen, you and your organization made one critical error. You assumed that because I live alone, work quietly, and keep to myself, I was weak. But there's a difference between being quiet and being defenseless." 6 police cars rounded the corner, followed by 2 FBI vans and Mark's familiar black SUV. The difference, I continued, is that quiet people like me, we've usually seen real danger. We've been in real fights. And we know the difference between someone who's actually tough and someone who just bullies civilians. As federal agents swarmed the area, Karen made one last desperate play. Morrison, you don't understand. This isn't just about solar panels. Kozlov's organization controls energy infrastructure across 12 states. If you don't back down, they'll destroy your life, your neighborhood, everyone you care about. Mark Valander appeared at my side, handcuffs already out. Karen Dennis, you're under arrest for attempted arson, terrorist threats, conspiracy, and violation of federal parole. As they led her away, Karen looked back at me one final time. This isn't over, Morrison. You can't fight the entire system. But as I watched the FBI loading boxes of evidence from the white van that had been watching my house, I realized she was wrong about something fundamental. I wasn't fighting the system. I was part of a different system, one that included federal agents like Mark, honest cops like Bob Henderson, neighbors like Mrs. Patterson who valued truth over convenience, and thousands of other Americans who decided that corporate intimidation was a line they wouldn't let anyone cross. 3 weeks later, I got a call from the power company. Not a billing dispute this time, an apology. Richard Kozlov's investment group was under federal investigation, and the power company was restoring net metering to all affected customers, plus compensation for lost revenue. Karen Dennis and her fake inspector pleaded guilty to federal charges and received sentences of 8 and 5 years, respectively. Richard Kozlov was arrested in Miami and charged with racketeering, conspiracy, and operating a criminal enterprise. But the real victory came 2 months later, when I got a letter from a man in Arizona. He'd heard about my case through news coverage of the federal investigation. His HOA had tried the same scam, using almost identical fake documents. Thanks to your fight, he wrote, I knew what I was looking at. I called the FBI immediately, and they shut down the operation before anyone got hurt. Similar letters arrived from Texas, Colorado, and North Carolina. The fake federal document scheme had been operating in dozens of states, but now law enforcement knew what to look for. I still live in the same house. I still work at the power plant. My solar panels still generate clean electricity and save me money every month. But something had changed in our neighborhood. People talked to each other now, really talked. Mrs. Patterson organized a monthly coffee meeting where neighbors could discuss any concerns about contractors, inspectors, or anyone claiming government authority. Bob Henderson started a neighborhood watch program that focused specifically on fraud prevention. The Hendersons installed solar panels 6 months later. So did the Yamadas. So did 5 other families on our street. Because sometimes, when someone tries to steal your independence, the best response is to help your neighbors claim theirs. On quiet evenings, I sit on my back porch and look at those 24 solar panels. They're not just generating electricity anymore. They're generating something more important. They're generating freedom. And that's worth fighting for, no matter how powerful your enemies think they are. Have you ever wondered what one person can accomplish when they refuse to be intimidated? Well, now you know. Sometimes the quiet guy next door is exactly the person you want on your side when things get dangerous. The truth is, we're all stronger than we think. We just have to be willing to find out how strong.